On Thursday, May 14th, Pete Townshend, Eddie Vedder, and friends are playing the Rosemont Theater, benefiting the Who's Teen Cancer America charity. On the phone with us, the lead singer of Pearl Jam, Chicago's own Eddie Vedder. Eddie, thanks for getting up this morning.
Yeah, well, I got up anyway, but this is another reason to be awake.
Eddie, I got to ask you, a few years ago, I was at Wrigley Field. I saw you and Pearl Jam play. You got to paint a picture for me. You're a Chicago guy. You're a lifelong Cub fan. Come back to Chicago to play at a historic Wrigley Field. Paint a picture. How nervous were you or excited before you got on stage?
Well, you'll see that my concerns were founded because kind of a beautiful day before we did a sound check. I'd seen Springsteen play 2 shows. The second one, it rained. It was a torrential downpour, and he turned it into a celebration. So something was going to happen. We just didn't know what. And it probably wouldn't happen to somebody that wasn't from Chicago. It was like if it was your dream,
right?
You don't just walk into a place where they haven't won the World Series in 100 years. You're just not going to walk in. So it was just as I expected, really.
And then a 2.5-hour rain delay. What did you do for 2.5 hours backstage at Wrigley?
Well, that's the thing. That's when you look back on these things, and I remember less about the show than I remember the minutes with the fire marshal and Tom Ricketts. I remember that like so clearly. But the other nice thing, Ernie Banks was next. He was the next song up, and so when we had that delay, we told him it's going to be a while, and he said that's fine with me. You know, is that a bottle of red wine? And so we had almost 2 hours with Ernie and with my kids and our friends, and he was really beautiful that night. And he called me 2 days later at about 7:30 in the morning singing. We talked for about another 2 hours that morning about the Negro Leagues and about Jose Cardinal and about the 70s Cubs and the 60s Cubs. And now, especially now, looking back at what a blessing that was. God
bless Ernie Banks, man. What a great night that was. And Jose Cardinal, you talk about one of the greatest afros in the history of baseball.
I thought you were going to say athletes. That too.
Yes. And you mentioned Springsteen in there. How does that work? When you went up on stage while the boss was playing at Wrigley, does he call you and say, hey, Eddie, I'm going to be in Chicago. You want to stop by and do a song?
Well, I was going to go no matter what, and then I think when he heard I was there, and we'd go into his back room, and he'd have a guitar, and he'd be with a marker, and then he'll say, hey, Ed, how about a little darkness tonight? Are you feeling darkness? What do you think about the... And I'd say, I really love that song, Trapped, and, yeah, we can do that, and... It was always exciting as a kid to get through to somebody like you or Dan and request a song and have it played and dedicate it to your girlfriend. Well, that was always exciting. But to actually be able to request it from the guy is that's a privilege that never seems to get old.
Eddie, tell me how you and Pete Townshend hooked up for this charity.
I think Pete, for years, the last few years, wanted to do something in Chicago. He had done a number of things in Chicago, mainly based around Father Smith, who was running the Maryville Academy, and then now he's got his own foundation, the Standing Tall Foundation, that gets scholarships for underprivileged youth, trying to affect their lives in a positive way through education. And it got put off because of scheduling here and there, and he asked if I'd be included. We work with this woman, Mary Beth Nawa, who's fantastic. And then what happened, it kind of evolved into Roger asking if I'd take over a bit on vocals so he doesn't have 3 nights in a row, because it's on a day off in between 2 other shows. In a way, I've got the keys to the Who on this one. Just have to drive responsibly.
Well, Eddie, explain it to me, because you grew up a Who fan. I mean, do you have that moment on stage when you look over and you're singing and Pete Townshend is playing guitar? I mean, do you have that moment and say to yourself, what is going on here?
Well, you definitely have a moment where you think, well, this is the best seat I've ever had. It's really about how much the Who affected us, how much they changed us, how much the music moved us, and how it, saved us in many ways. It's like the one thing we all have in common. So that's what we'll be celebrating at this gig. And I know Joan Jett, she'll join us for at least one. And then Zach Starkey reached out to Joe Walsh, and I think he's coming. So that's very exciting, he and Pete. So that'll be exciting to see.
So when we say Pete Townshend, Eddie Vedder, and friends, you're talking about Joe Walsh is going to be there, Joan Jett's going to show up, and maybe some more surprises.
We'll see. We'll see. I was excited to see if Jack White could come, but he's playing some acoustic gigs. He's a beauty. He would have been perfect.
You know, I can sing Who songs if you need somebody.
You should. You've got my. If you can text me some kind of audition tape,
Yeah.
you should really. I'd have to go over that.
Okay, yeah, we'll run through that.
As trusting as I am.
Let me ask you, I've seen you the last few times you've come to Chicago at the United Center, at Wrigley Field. What kind of wine do you drink on stage? What are you sipping on?
The one with the cork that's open.
Whatever is available backstage.
If it's not white.
Well, on Thursday, May 14th, Pete Townshend, along with Eddie Vedder and friends, playing the Rosemont Theater, benefiting the Who's Teen Cancer America charity. You can go to our website, WDRV.com, and get all the information. Eddie, thanks for getting up so early. I'll buy you a beer at Stanley's when you're in town, okay?
Perfect.
Eddie Vedder. Thank you, Eddie.
My pleasure. Thanks, Pete.